laughed at his medieval bow. They mocked the strange weapon slung across his back. They whispered that he was trapped in the wrong century. But in the chaos of World War II, during one of the most brutal phases of the European campaign, that bow would silence the laughter. And within 72 hours, it would be credited with the deaths of 7 German sergeants, each shot placing an old-world weapon into the pages of modern warfare. June 1944. Normandy, France. Amid the hedgerows, the ambushes, and the relentless German counterattack, one British commando officer, Lieutenant John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, known simply as Mad Jack, prepared for a mission so dangerous that even the most battle-hardened men hesitated. But he carried something they did not, a specially modified longbow. And what happened next would become one of the most extraordinary combat episodes of the Second World War. To understand the events of those 72 hours, we must first understand the man behind the bow, and why his unorthodox weapon would soon become a nightmare for German NCOs stationed in the Bocage country of Normandy. Lieutenant Jack Churchill, born in Hong Kong in 1906 and raised in Britain, was no ordinary soldier. A graduate of the Royal Military College Sandhurst, he served first in the Manchester Regiment, later joining the Commandos, the British elite raiding force created in 1940. He was skilled with rifles, anti-tank weapons, explosives, but most famously, he was a master archer, one of the finest in Britain. And when war erupted, Jack said words that would define his entire legacy. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. The bow was not a gimmick. It was a weapon he had trained with for decades, silent, deadly, precise. In the thick hedgerows of Normandy, silence was everything. After D-Day, Allied forces pushed inland, but the German response was fierce. Elements of the 352nd Infantry Division, 30th Mobile Brigade, and scattered Waffen-SS detachments fought bitterly to hold every field and every village. British commandos of No. 2 and No. 6 Troop 1st Special Service Brigade were tasked with clearing pockets of resistance, especially German NCOs directing counterattacks. German sergeants, Unteroffiziere, Feldwebel, and Oberfeldwebel were the spine of Wehrmacht operations, controlling squad movement, fire discipline, and counter-ambushes. Eliminating them meant disrupting entire German platoons. This is where Churchill's bow became more than a curiosity. It became an unmatched tool of silent elimination.
Terrain also played a role. Normandy's infamous bocage was a nightmare. Thick hedgerows, narrow winding lanes, visibility reduced to just 20 to 40 yards in many areas. Ambushes were constant. A rifle shot echoed across fields, but a bowstring almost silent. At 0600 hours, the fog still clung low over the hedgerows. Visibility was barely 50 meters. Churchill led a 6-man element equipped with Sten guns, Fairbairn Sykes knives, and one utterly unconventional longbow. They advanced carefully along a sunken lane near a farmhouse suspected of harboring German spotters. By 0615, Corporal Henderson whispered, "Movement, right side hedge, 2 figures." Through the mist, Churchill spotted them, 2 German NCOs carrying MP40s, helmets low, scanning the field. They were less than 35 yards away. Churchill raised his hand. Hold. He slowly unslung the bow, knocked a broadhead steel-tipped arrow, drew silently. Thunk! The arrow pierced the first sergeant's upper chest. He collapsed instantly, gasping. The second sergeant spun, but Churchill was already knocking another shaft. Thunk! The arrow struck him beneath the collarbone, dropping him into the grass. Silent, precise, lethal. 2 German sergeants eliminated in under 10 seconds without a single gunshot. His men stared in stunned disbelief. Churchill whispered, "Let's move."
June 15th. The Germans intensified their patrols after discovering 2 NCOs dead with strange wounds. Rumors spread among Wehrmacht ranks. An English archer is in the hedgerows. By 0930 hours, Churchill's unit intercepted German signaling near Hill 112, a strategic high ground contested viciously by both sides. A German squad was seen moving along a hedgerow, led by a Feldwebel, his rank patch visible even at distance. Churchill signaled his men to fan out. The Germans were moving parallel to them, just 40 yards away, obscured by thick brush. The Feldwebel halted, raised his binoculars. He was searching for them. Churchill whispered, "Target the leader." A bow was perfect here. A rifle shot would give away their flank. A Sten gun would spray wildly, but an arrow could kill without a sound. Churchill inhaled, exhaled, released. Thunk. The arrow struck the Feldwebel in the throat. He dropped instantly, clutching his neck. The rest of the German squad panicked. Some dove for cover, others scattered. Churchill's men opened fire with Stens, finishing the ambush. The British withdrew immediately, but now Churchill's arrows were unmistakable. A third sergeant was dead. By the third day, June 16th, German frustration boiled. Reports now specifically mentioned a silent British killer, arrows found in bodies, elite commando activity. German officers ordered their NCOs to double patrol frequency. They needed to find the source of these silent eliminations. But doubling patrols meant doubling targets. By 1400 hours, a 3-man German NCO patrol moved along a narrow lane near La Butte. They were accompanied by 2 enlisted riflemen. Churchill's detachment, positioned in an elevated hedgerow above the lane, watched them approach. The leading Unteroffizier paused, inspecting footprints. He was good, experienced, someone who could detect British movement. He crouched down. Churchill had a clean shot. Distance, 22 yards. He drew, released, thunk. The arrow slammed into the sergeant's upper back. He fell forward, face first, into the dirt. Chaos erupted. The remaining Germans scrambled. Sten fire echoed through the hedgerows. A grenade detonated, shaking the lane with a blast of soil and smoke. When it cleared, 2 riflemen lay dead, another wounded. But the NCO's body carried the unmistakable mark of Churchill's arrow. A 4th sergeant eliminated. By the morning of June 17th, the situation shifted dramatically. German command in the sector, elements of the 353rd Infantry Division, finally pieced together the pattern. 7 NCOs dead, all in the same region, all slain cleanly, silently, and with arrows. This was no random act of violence. This was a targeted elimination campaign. A British commando unit had to be operating close, and the German commanders were determined to crush them before sunset. They deployed a search perimeter of nearly 80 soldiers, including 2 squads of infantry, 1 MG-42 team, 3 NCO leaders, a signals operator equipped with field telephones, and most dangerously, a patrol dog unit. For Churchill and his men, hiding in the maze of hedgerows, the threat became immediate and suffocating. By 1100 hours, Churchill's 6-man detachment found themselves boxed in on 3 sides. German patrols grew closer with every minute. The distant chattering of MG-42 bursts echoed across the bocage as the Germans fired suppressive shots into hedgerows, hoping to flush out any hidden forces. Then came the detail that froze the blood of every commando present. Barking. Close. A German dog team had caught a scent. Henderson whispered, "Sir, if they have dogs, they'll be on us in minutes." Churchill didn't blink. "We stay quiet, we stay low. Nobody fires unless necessary." But the Germans were closing in fast. By 1200 hours, German voices were clear and nearby, barely 20 yards behind the hedgerow. A Feldwebel barked orders. "Form a line, move slowly, check every gap in the hedge." Another voice responded, "Dog unit ready." Henderson mouthed silently, "Sir, this is it. "We're surrounded." Churchill's face remained calm, eerily calm, as if the world slowing down somehow improved his clarity. The dog barked again, sharper this time, closer. Leaves rustled, boots crunched against damp earth. The Germans were now only 10 yards from the commando position. Every man held his breath. Their stens were useless here. A single burst would reveal their entire position, unleashing MG-42 hellfire from multiple angles. The dog handler shouted, "Hold! He smells something!" A shadow moved directly behind Churchill's position. For a split second, all hope seemed lost.
The lead German NCO, an Oberfeldwebel, stepped through a narrow gap in the hedge, MP-40 raised. He froze, because he saw it. A faint glint, Churchill's arrowhead peeking over the grass. He opened his mouth to shout. Churchill reacted first. He moved like a ghost. One fluid motion. Draw, aim, release, thunk. The arrow hit the NCO square in the sternum. He gasped silently, collapsing backward into the lane. The dog snarled violently. The handler jerked the leash, but the animal lunged toward the hedgerow. Henderson whispered, panic rising in his voice, "They know our exact position now." And he was right. Shouts erupted in German. "Contact! Contact! They're in the hedge! Bring up the machine gun!" Within seconds, the air filled with chaos, the unmistakable scream of an MG-42 preparing to open fire. Churchill raised his fist. "Fall back, 10 yards. Quiet." His men scrambled, crawling rapidly through the hedge tunnel behind them. But then, the MG-42 opened up. The gun ripped through the hedgerow, tearing branches, earth, and bark apart. A storm of bullets shredded the position where Churchill's men had been moments earlier. Brown, the youngest commando, stumbled. A bullet grazed his arm. He bit down hard to stop himself from screaming. Dirt exploded around them. Chunks of hedge flew like shrapnel. Churchill turned back. His voice was low, controlled, unbelievably calm. "Move. Now." They crawled deeper into the hedgerow tunnel, then broke into a sprint across a small field, staying low until they reached the next hedge line. The Germans were furious. They had sprung the trap, yet somehow failed to crush their prey. But the worst was still coming.
Churchill knew what would happen next. The Germans, realizing they had missed the kill, would begin a pincer movement. 2 squads looping around to cut off escape routes, while the MG-42 team continued laying suppressive fire. It was textbook German tactics, and deadly in the bocage. Churchill's men were now trapped between an MG-42 to the east, dog units to the west, a rifle squad pushing north, another squad sweeping from the south. They were stuck in a wedge of farmland barely 200 meters wide. Henderson wiped sweat from his brow. "Sir, we're boxed in. They'll crush us in minutes." Churchill knelt, inspecting the terrain, his mind cold, analytical, fearless. A shallow drainage ditch ran diagonally across the field. It led toward a small cluster of trees. Not ideal, but it was something. He looked at his men. Into the ditch, stay below the grass line, no noise. They obeyed instantly. As they crawled, bullets cracked overhead, not aimed, but probing fire, meant to flush prey. The Germans were tightening the net. "You can't outrun a pincer," Henderson whispered. Churchill replied quietly, "No, but you can break one side of it if you remove its leader." His men stared at him, only then understanding what he meant. The Germans had multiple NCOs coordinating the maneuver. Kill the right one, and the entire flank would collapse in confusion. Henderson's eyes widened. "You're going after the sergeant?" Churchill nodded once. "Keep moving. I'll be right behind you."
and then, with impossible calm, he slung his bow over his shoulder and vanished into the hedgerows alone.
While his men crawled through the ditch, Churchill looped silently toward the origin of the commands echoing through the fields. A harsh voice shouted orders, an NCO coordinating the southern flanking movement. Churchill crept to the hedge's edge and peered through a gap. There he was, a German Feldwebel, standing tall behind his squad of 8 men. He held field glasses in one hand, MP40 slung over his shoulder, barking instructions with authority. Distance, 32 yards. Obscured only partially by leaves. Fast-moving, upright, alert. The most difficult shot of the entire 72-hour ordeal. Churchill exhaled slowly. He knocked the arrow, drew the string back until it pressed against his cheek. Every muscle held steady. The Feldwebel turned, still shouting, still controlling the battlefield, and Churchill released. Thunk! The arrow slammed beneath the sergeant's left clavicle, driving deep. He staggered, dropped the binoculars, collapsed to his knees. Confusion erupted instantly among the German squad. "Sniper! Where did it come from? Get down!" But there was no rifle crack, no muzzle flash, nothing to trace. In total panic, the German southern flank halted and pulled back, their leader dying in the grass, an arrow lodged beneath his collarbone. Churchill melted back into the hedgerows and rejoined his men. Henderson whispered, "Sir, was that—" Churchill nodded. "One more sergeant. Let's move." They slipped away into the ditch line, leaving chaos behind them. The 7th German sergeant was dead, and the Germans never even knew what hit them.
Churchill and his 6-man commando team were still deep inside the German net, but the death of the Feldwebel had fractured the southern pincer. Radio confusion spread across the German lines. Orders contradicted each other. Some squads pulled back, others advanced blindly. It wasn't victory, but it was the opportunity Churchill needed. "Stay in the ditch," he whispered. We move north, slow and silent. The men crawled through the muddy gully as bullets continued to crack overhead. Dirt stung their faces, but compared to the storm behind them, this ditch was salvation. At 1400 hours, the distant MG-42 began shifting its fire pattern. The Germans had stopped spraying blindly. They were repositioning, and that meant only one thing. They were preparing for a final sweep. Churchill stopped the team. His face hardened. "They're correcting their fields of fire. If we don't break out now, they'll pin us again." Henderson swallowed. "Sir, where do we go? They're everywhere." Churchill pointed to the map tucked in his breast pocket. "Northwest, a farmhouse with stone walls. If we reach it, we can break the line." But between them and the farmhouse lay one last German blocking force, and this one was different. It wasn't a patrol. It wasn't a squad. It was a prepared position. And worse, it had a machine gun.
At 1540 hours, Churchill and his men reached the outer line of a hedgerow, overlooking a small rise in the field. And there it was. A German MG-42 sandbag nest dug into the ridge. 2 riflemen covered the flanks. A sergeant crouched behind the gun, adjusting the feed tray. The MG-42 was pointed directly at the route Churchill planned to use for escape. Henderson whispered, "Sir, we can't flank it. The other hedgerow is too open." Churchill nodded slowly. "We don't flank it." He unslung the bow. "We take it head on." His men stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, you can't. It's 40 yards. He's behind cover." But Churchill wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the German sergeant setting up the weapon. The barrel gleamed in the afternoon light. Steam rose faintly from earlier firing. The gunner leaned forward, placing his cheek to the sight. And Churchill acted. He stood slowly, just enough to clear the hedge. The wind was light. Distance, 41 yards. The sergeant was partially protected by sandbags, but his upper torso was exposed, barely. Churchill pulled the bowstring to his cheek. Every muscle tightened. The world narrowed to a single point, the gunner's chest. He exhaled, released. Thunk. The arrow arced, slicing the air, and struck the sergeant square in the upper chest. The man froze, eyes wide, hands slipping from the MG-42. He collapsed backward into the sandbags. The rifleman beside him stared in shock. Before they could shout, Churchill's men opened fire. Brrr! Brrr! 2 short Sten bursts cut them down. The machine gun lay silent. Churchill whispered, "Move, now." And they sprinted for the farmhouse.
They had covered barely 50 yards when a sudden shout erupted behind them. A remaining German rifleman, one who had survived the chaos, rose from a shallow depression in the field, leveled his carabiner 98K, and fired. The crack of the rifle echoed violently. Churchill felt the bullet slice past his left arm, so close it tore his sleeve. Henderson shouted, "Down!" The team dove into the grass, but the German wasn't finished. He chambered another round, aimed again, and fired. This one struck the dirt inches from Churchill's face, showering him with soil. Churchill rolled into a kneeling position, bow in hand, but it was too long a shot, and the rifleman was moving. Henderson grabbed his Sten and fired a 3-round burst. Miss. The German darted left, firing again. A bullet struck the ground near Corporal Brown's leg. Henderson shouted, "Sir, we can't outrun him! He'll pick us off!" The German was well trained, disciplined, and calm, a marksman-level NCO. Churchill's mind raced. A direct charge would be suicide. A firefight at distance favored the riflemen, and they were exposed in an open stretch of land. Then Churchill spotted something. A gap in the hedge about 20 yards to their right, just wide enough for one man to slip through. If he could reach it, he could flank the rifleman. He spoke quickly. "I'll take him. When I move, you fire short bursts, force him to keep his head down." Henderson protested, "Sir, you'll be exposed." Churchill simply replied, "We don't have a choice." And before anyone could stop him, he sprinted. Bullets snapped behind him, ripped past him, tore into the hedgerow ahead of him. He dove through the gap, rolled to his feet, and vanished into the shadows of the next hedge. The German rifleman, confused by the sudden disappearance, paused to scan the field. That pause would cost him.
Churchill moved through the hedge line like a hunter, stepping lightly, bow drawn. He now had a perfect flank angle. The German rifleman was just 25 yards away, too focused on Henderson's suppressive Sten bursts to notice Churchill. The rifleman raised his weapon again, slow, steady, precise. He aimed directly where Henderson lay behind a rock. Churchill whispered, "Not today." He released. Thunk. The arrow struck the German square in the back, driving deep. He dropped forward instantly, rifle falling from his hands, and lay still. Churchill approached the fallen soldier. He pulled the arrow free, wiped the tip clean. Then he said quietly, "Keep moving." His men watched the entire scene in stunned silence. They had seen rifles save lives. They had seen grenades tear apart bunkers. But a bow? Taking down a trained rifleman in a modern battlefield. This was something else entirely. With the firing line broken, the commandos finally reached the stone farmhouse at the edge of the field. They took positions, regrouped, and caught their breath. Churchill scanned the horizon. German voices faded in the distance. The search net was collapsing. Squads disorganized without their NCOs. Henderson approached him. "We're clear, sir. We actually made it." Churchill gave a faint smile. "We're not done yet, but we're alive." He tightened the bowstring, checked his remaining arrows, 3 left,
and looked toward the distant hedgerows where German troops were still shouting, still searching, still confused. What happened next would determine whether they truly escaped or were caught in yet another closing trap. But there was no denying it. The turning point had arrived. And it had arrived because of one man and one medieval weapon the enemy never expected to face.
Hans was badly wounded, and Louis knew he didn't have much time left. German patrols were now sweeping the forest twice as fast, slicing through bushes with rifles drawn, hunting the phantom archer who had taken down 7 of their sergeants in just a few days. Louis realized one thing. If I stay here one more night, I may not make it out alive. The last night, silence was more dangerous than gunfire. Louis stayed absolutely still the entire night. Only the sound of rainfall and the distant echo of German boots cracking branches. But his mind stayed focused. I have to get back. All of this has a purpose. Before sunrise, he crawled through the shadows of the trees, moving slowly, silently. Mud clung to every step. One arrow in hand, the rest strapped tightly to his chest. Louis spotted them, 2 German soldiers, standing right behind a thick cluster of bushes. They were the last obstacle between him and escape. But this time, Louis didn't have many arrows left. He had one shot. He crouched low, took a deep breath, and placed his final arrow gently against the bowstring. It cut through the air with a sharp hiss, and then thud. The first soldier collapsed instantly. The second soldier spun around, panicked, searching the trees. But Louis had already moved positions. With no time to lose, Louis drew his knife. As the soldier lowered his radio to listen, Louis slipped behind him, silent as a shadow. A brief struggle, then the forest fell quiet again. Louis pushed through the muddy woods until he stepped onto a narrow dirt road that led back to his unit. His uniform was soaked with rain, blood, and dirt, but his face held a strange calm. When he reached the outpost, the other soldiers froze in shock. "Louis, you're alive." He simply nodded and said, "The bow did its job." After the harrowing 72 hours, Lieutenant John Mad Jack Churchill and his 6-man commando team finally returned to their unit. 7 German sergeants were dead. Countless other German soldiers were thrown into confusion, and the Allies had secured critical terrain in Normandy thanks to this audacious raid. Churchill himself was unharmed, though soaked, mud-covered, and exhausted. He had relied not on modern firepower alone, but on skill, courage, and a weapon many considered obsolete, a longbow. Churchill's actions did not go unnoticed. His daring raid was later documented in British Army intelligence reports. The precise elimination of key NCOs disrupted German defensive coordination for days. He became the last known combat archer in modern warfare, a title that historians still reference when discussing unusual but effective tactics in World War II. Soldiers who served alongside him recalled his extraordinary calm under fire. He would walk into the line of enemy fire with a smile and his bow ready. It was terrifying and inspiring all at once.
Churchill's actions did not go unnoticed. His daring raid was later documented in British Army intelligence reports. The precise elimination of key NCOs disrupted German defensive coordination for days. He became the last known combat archer in modern warfare, a title that historians still reference when discussing unusual but effective tactics in World War II. Soldiers who served alongside him recalled his extraordinary calm under fire. He would walk into the line of enemy fire with a smile and his bow ready. It was terrifying and inspiring all at once. This episode was not only about arrows and strategy. It highlighted the human cost and ingenuity in war, the fear gripping every soldier, Allied and German alike. the sheer determination required to survive in impossible odds. The psychological impact of unconventional warfare, how one individual's courage can disrupt an entire enemy unit. Churchill's story would later inspire books, documentaries, and military historians, cementing his legacy as a living legend of World War II. Soldiers who had fought alongside Churchill discussed the raid post-mission. Expressions of awe, respect, exhaustion, and relief filled the air. The team reflected on the daring operation and the extraordinary courage it took to survive against overwhelming odds. Muddy terrain, hedgerows, and distant smoke from skirmishes painted the background as they regrouped, quietly sharing in the human element of war and camaraderie. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. A story of courage, creativity, and the extraordinary human spirit in the midst of unimaginable danger. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.